It's Thursday, July 7th.
From inside the WTOP newsroom, this is the DMV Download, brought to you by the men and women of Steamfitters Local 602. Get an estimate and learn more at steamfitters-602.org.
Today, we sit down with outgoing DC Health Director Dr. LaQuandra Nesbitt, who saw the district through nearly 8 years and navigated the city through the pandemic. The day after she announced she's leaving, she tells us what it was like as a health director in the midst of a health emergency.
Some know that I'm a morning person, but that took being a morning person to a slightly different level.
And buying weed legally in D.C. is a complex process, but it just got a little easier after Mayor Bowser signed a law letting most adults self-prescribe medical marijuana cards. We talked to one of the D.C. council members who introduced the bill, Kenyan McDuffie.
These people who need cannabis can self-certify and have access for medical purposes. And we think that the market exists, the demand exists, and the public for a while has been asking us to do this.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Cloherty.
And I'm Luke Garrett. Dr. LaQuandra Nesbit is leaving her job as Director of DC Health. She held the position for nearly 8 years, but became a household name during the pandemic when she joined Mayor Bowser for daily press briefings on the changing reality of COVID-19.
Now she is making time to sit down with us today and share some of her experiences. Thank you, Dr. Nesbit, for joining us on Zoom today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Megan.
And let's get right to it. Why are you leaving after almost 8 years doing this job?
You know, I have come to really love Washington, D.C. I think most people know this is my second time around at D.C. Health. I spent time here back in 2008 to 2011. I think that there is so much more to do in my career. This job has absolutely been an honor and privilege of a lifetime, and I've learned so much. And there's a lot we need to do to improve the health of our communities. And at this point in my career, I'd like to be able to address the health of our communities from a different vantage point other than governmental public health, where I've spent the last, I'd say, about 14 years of my career.
So you're not going to Montgomery County to be their health director, is what you're saying?
I will confirm that is not on the agenda for now.
We had to ask.
The mayor had some lovely things to say about you today. She said that she was looking for somebody to be the public face of the district's health.
She's outstanding. And I think DC residents know that. They had the opportunity to witness her brilliance.
Tell us about working with Mayor Bowser and some of the challenges, because you guys were just, arm in arm through the pandemic. What do you think was the biggest challenge of getting through that time?
Yeah, one of the things that was really beneficial for me, as you all mentioned at the top, going into the pandemic, I have been in the role for over 5. And health was always a priority for Mayor Bowser. And so going into the pandemic, we had already built a relationship with both trust and support, which I think was extremely important. And so by the time that we needed to, as you say, appear before the public on a daily basis, she understood how I worked. I understood very clearly how she worked. And we were able to have that sort of collaborative and very respectful relationship with each other during some of the most difficult and tough times for the city.
And Doctor, you were really at the helm during this pandemic. You had to make life and death decisions often for about 2 years. What was that really like for all the district residents who were watching those briefings? What was it like, kind of just trying to communicate the realities of this pandemic?
Sure. So I get this question often. We had daily briefings very early in the morning. And so my day would start maybe 2 to 3 hours before those daily briefings. And I'm not talking about the public briefings. I'm talking about our internal briefings. And some know that I'm a morning person, but that took being a morning person to a slightly different level. And it was really having to take all of this information in. Public health is a science. People train for it. We have a lot of people in our organization who are trained at the master's level degree or doctoral degree who study epidemiology and the data. And I think, during the pandemic, the public got really used to understanding how to look at trends and when they could go and when they should stop. But public health professionals have been doing this for a long time. And so part of my job was taking in all of those inputs and doing my best job to make it plain language and give people those simple instructions they could follow at the various phases of an ever evolving pandemic. And at the same time, right, you're trying to keep yourself healthy. You're trying to keep yourself healthy from a physical perspective. You're trying to keep yourself healthy from an emotional and social well-being perspective. And you're trying to make sure that you take the time to nurture yourself and your personal and professional relationships. So, I don't want to be disingenuous and make it seem like it was the easiest time ever, but there were a lot of things that you always needed to be aware of.
The mayor said today that, after she was praising how you were the front, what'd she say, the district's doctor, Luke? Is that what
the district's doctor. That's what she said. Yep.
She then goes, well, people don't know this about her, but she is a data nerd. She loves budgets. She loves that kind of stuff.
She loves org charts, and she loves putting people in places where they can succeed and make DC residents healthier.
I do want to address that gap, that 2-week gap of the data reporting, because yes, as an agency, you all have addressed what happened. But from running the agency, it must have been a little frustrating because you go out of your way all for this time to try and parse the data for everybody. And then you have this gap you have to deal with.
Yeah, so internally, we never experienced the gap, right? And I think that's what's important for people to know. I was always getting what I needed from my team. And we share data across a lot of platforms. We created coronavirus.dc.gov, where a lot of jurisdictions and even the federal partners look at our dashboard to see how we're distilling data and making it publicly available. And then we try our best to put data on national dashboards where people can compare across jurisdictions, right? And so in 2+ years, we had one short time frame in the grand scheme of 20+ months, where one of those connections and submitting some of the data that we still had the ability to look at in-house and make policy decisions, not get to that partner who puts that data on dashboards for people to compare publicly. But it never impacted our ability to be able to care for our residents or my ability to observe trends to see whether or not we were going in the right direction here. And I think that's for me, the most important thing for people to be able to understand, because you're absolutely right. And the mayor's absolutely right. I'm that kind of person who wants to go to all the budget meetings, who's looking at the data, who talks to my colleagues in other agencies about best ways to look at data internally and the best ways to translate data to meaningful information for the public.
And we've been looking at the pandemic in a retrospective, way here. But as you all know, the pandemic is surely still here. And we have a new sub-variant, BA.5, a sub-variant of Omicron, that experts say really may create another spike here. So for DC residents tuning in, what should they really look out for? What's ahead of us, in this new pandemic phase?
Yeah, with each variant, we don't know how these variants are going to behave. And that's the tricky part. And it's why we were always very aggressive about the messaging for let's get everyone vaccinated and get people vaccinated really quickly. So there is another subvariant out there, BA4, BA5, that's higher in some regions of the US than others. And it has the potential to change some of the positive trends that we are seeing. What we want people to know now is that we are in a different phase of the pandemic for more than one reason. For now, the virus, while it seems to be spreading faster, it's not causing people to be as sick. We're also in a different phase of the pandemic because we have more tools in our toolbox than we had in 2020. So being in a different phase of our response isn't just about knowing how the subvariant is going to behave. It's also knowing that we have so many more tools in our toolkit than we did back in March of 2020.
I was telling Doctor before we started this interview how I was with her there for all the press conferences for about 2 years. And there's about a million things we could talk about as far as initiatives during the pandemic, including having people reach out to seniors, creating equity in vaccination spots, making sure everybody had a place to go, setting up an entire convention center in case we needed it. I mean, there's just so much to talk about. As you leave this position, what do you think your legacy is? Do you think it's around COVID, or do you think it's around some of the other initiatives like the maternal health things that you guys have spent a lot of time on?
You ask a very important question. It's one I've spent a lot of time reflecting on. And the staff, COVID isn't necessarily the thing that they're spending a lot of time thinking about. I think in their personal conversations to me, the first thing is they're doing like most DC residents do. They're grateful for my leadership during COVID. And they say, thank you for helping to keep us safe. And then we immediately go into some other part of our time together over the past 8 years, right? So if it's about how we revolutionized the way that we address maternal and child health, right? Shifting our focus from expanding home visiting programs and thinking more about a place-based model. We've also been able to reflect a lot on how we've taken a broader view for school health services. It's not just about a nurse in a school, but how we help families connect to community resources that are available to help children have better physical, mental, and emotional well-being. We've also spent a lot of time talking about some of the things that are part of our bigger equity agenda, right, around social and structural determinants of health and racial justice. So there's so much that we have done together as a team: backyard chickens, bike lanes, goat yoga. So lots of things, rodents, lots of things.
I have to ask you what's next. I know you said you won't be with government, but are you taking a little break because you deserve it, or are you going right into another job?
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to exploring opportunities that'll allow me to, look back over my career as being a practicing family doc, working in governmental public health, also having worked in academics and working with medical students in academic environments, and looking for an opportunity that really lets me bring all of that experience together.
Well, that sounds like an amazing job. I hope you find it.
I do too. And I love the District of Columbia. So I'm a native of Michigan. The weather here is better.
And that's saying something right now that you're saying that. So that you mean that.
It's a great place to live.
DC Health Director Dr. LaQuandra Nesbit, thank you for taking the time to reflect with us about your past 8 years.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Luke and Megan.
And coming up, it just got a whole lot easier to get medical marijuana in DC. We'll talk about why after the break. Backed by the experience of its hardworking members, Steamfitters Local 602 is ready to take on your next commercial heating, cooling, HVAC, or refrigeration project. Steamfitters Local 602 adds value to our community through its partnerships with local contractors and building owners, all while keeping the focus on improving the lives of its members and their families throughout the DMV. For work that's on time and on budget, go to steamfitters-602.org to schedule your next project. That's steamfitters-602.org. Steamfitters Local 602. Changing lives.
Thanks for listening to the DMV Download. If you like the podcast, head to our show page, give us a rating, and leave a review.
We read all of them and use as suggestions to improve this show that we're so proud of. It also helps other listeners find this, our region's only local daily news podcast.
Thanks for making us a part of your day. Since legalized in 2015, buying weed in DC legally has been complicated. But it just got a lot easier after Mayor Bowser signed a bill into law yesterday, allowing adults over 21 to self-prescribe medical marijuana cards.
Before, you had to get a medical marijuana card from a doctor, but this bill allows D.C. residents to do it themselves. And Ward 5 Councilmember Kenyan McDuffie introduced this bill a few months back, joining us now on Zoom. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
As we said at the top, I mean, this was kind of complicated. How does this new law simplify the process of getting marijuana? And was there a demand for this from, a certain population?
Well, I think, it's important for context to say that it's been largely complicated because for nearly a decade, Congress has overturned the will of DC voters by forbidding the district from spending money to fully set up an adult use market. And so the congressional rider has allowed savvy business owners to really push the legal limits on gifting, as it's known locally, and where these folks who are essentially I-71 businesses are using the current law as a local gray market.
And how does this bill really fight back against that gray market? How does that really work?
Well, the challenge has been that today we have a number of Initiative 71 cannabis gifting shops in operation, which really hinders the ability of the regulated medical cannabis dispensaries to generate revenue and make a profit under the current medical marijuana regime that we have in place. And so we wanted to make sure that that was in mind, but also that the folks who are patients, these people who need cannabis, can self-certify and have access for medical purposes. And we think that the market exists, the demand exists, and the public for a while has been asking us to do this.
And so, when someone looks at this bill and they see that residents can self-prescribe without the need of a doctor, that might strike some concern. Oh, why is the doctor, being taken out? What would you say to that at-face concern?
Well, what I'd say is that, as a result, patients have the ability to secure the cannabis that they need, and that doctors have recognized as a need in District of Columbia as it is in cities across the country. And rather than have them secured in a way that is not sanctioned by the District of Columbia government, we're creating this opportunity for the market to work the way that I think most people who both are patients, but also folks who recognize the need for cannabis patients to have access. I think they all agree that this was the right thing to do for the District of Columbia.
You mentioned the unique position D.C. is in, that all of our laws have to go through Congress. Was this bill based off of any other city's experience in taking away the need for a doctor to prescribe a medical marijuana card?
We are always watching what other jurisdictions are doing. We're watching closely, frankly, with jurisdictions that have their own adult use market. And we hope that Congress will allow the District of Columbia to really address the needs of District of Columbia residents and fulfill the wishes of voters.
And just so I'm understanding this correctly, is this law kind of the limit of what D.C. Council and the D.C. government can do, and the rest is kind of up to the federal government? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, you understand it correctly. This is an emergency bill.
Why is it an emergency bill?
Because we wanted to make sure that since it rose to the level of emergency, it required 9 votes of the council, but that it went into effect immediately upon the signature of the mayor, which she's already provided. But it also means it's eventually going to expire after 90 days. And so the emergency language around self-certification mirrors the language in the permanent legislation that is pending before 3 committees at the council. We are likely to pass permanent legislation at some point soon, but you all know that we go on recess in a matter of about a week. And so this will be long enough to hold us over during recess, and we'll take up the permanent legislation if we can't get to it before recess.
I know it's kind of that busy time. You mentioned you have a week left, and we were looking up. You've been busy. You've got a ton of things with your name on it right now, which obviously begs the question, are you trying to get some stuff through? We know that you're no longer able to run for AG. Now you're running against Alyssa Silverman for her at-large seat. Tell us, are you feeling the pressure to really make some, push through the legislation you want to see on the off chance that you don't unseat Silverman?
Well, I'm not really feeling any pressure to push through legislation. I've been a pretty prolific legislator. And as I've told folks, I've never run for elected office with any particular opponent in mind. I've always run focused on my own candidacy and the issues that matter most to District of Columbia residents. And we know those issues well. It's issues around public safety. Everybody who lives here in the city should feel safe in their communities, whether they live in Ward 1 or Ward 8 or anywhere in between. We know that it is becoming increasingly unaffordable to live here in the District of Columbia. And I've been a champion for housing affordability. In fact, I've passed some of the most significant legislation that is dedicating hundreds of millions of dollars to the Housing Production Trust Fund. And I've worked with my colleagues and the mayor to get these things done. I've been a coalition builder over my tenure in the Council of the District of Columbia. And I think my record, my experience, and my qualifications are a clear contrast with my opponent, who seemingly has resorted to negative campaigning already. And what I've always said, and I believe in the school of thought with Michelle Obama, is that when they go low, we go high. And so it's usually people who resort to negative campaigning when they don't have a record of accomplishments to tout. Well, I have a record of accomplishments to tout. People know my work, they know my record, and I'm going to run on my record.
But this wasn't really the plan. I mean, obviously, you were going for AG, and now you want to get back on the council, and Alyssa Silverman gets to be your target. But I mean, why do you want to be on the council? Why don't we just let it go?
Well, what I've always said, regardless of what I was running for, whether it was running for Ward 5 council, whether it was running for Attorney General, is that my goal is always to serve the residents of the District of Columbia. It is my passion, it is my purpose. And I've spent my entire career doing just that. And so I wanted to always continue to work on behalf of the residents of the District of Columbia to deliver results. And I think what voters will see is that my record reflects that. And so what I'm asking them is for another opportunity to serve, this time as an at-large council member. And I'm happy to put my experience, my qualifications, and my record side by side with any council member or any other candidate in this race to ask the voters to decide who's best qualified to lead.
Ward 5 council member Kenyan McDuffie, thank you for the time explaining this, new bill that's now a law and, your candidacy.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to joining you all again sometime in the future.
After talking to Councilmember McDuffie, we reached out to his opponent, Alyssa Silverman, who had this response, quote, "For 8 years, I've been focused on advocating for working families in D.C., and my campaign reflects that. I rely on small money donors. I always have. Councilmember McDuffie's campaign will be fueled by big money interests, such as real estate developers. I think D.C. voters are smart enough to know who each of us will be advocating for at the Wilson Building."
And before we go, Megan,
Ooh, yes.
I was at a Nats game and I was with some friends, some, new friends.
Yeah.
And I was asking them, as I always do, so what do you want to know? I have this podcast. I want to fill it with
Yeah,
things you need to know. And this one guy comes up to me and he's like, you know what? Honestly, more than anything, I just want to know where to go on a date here in D.C. And he told me a compelling story. He's like, look,
I love it.
I moved here during the pandemic. Things have been shut down.
Right.
The world's open. It's summer. I'm like, meeting people. Where should I go? So, Andrew, I got you.
Wait, are we starting a new segment called DMV Dates?
I think we are. Yeah, I think it's time.
Are you impressed that I just named that off the top of my head?
That's pretty good. Alliterations, love it. For the first installment, we'll start small. Just, nice first date in D.C.
Oh, I have one too.
Okay, here's mine. You go to the Reach. It's this new, ish kind of segment cafe of the Kennedy Center. It's got a beautiful sculpture, some grass, so you get maybe a food, drink there. And then you just walk over the Theodore Roosevelt Bridge over to, Virginia. But before you get to Virginia, you dip into the Theodore Roosevelt Island where you can hike around, So that's a date that kind of takes, maybe $20 per person. So kind of manageable. And then when you're on the date, you can actually, have a little fun fact to tell your lucky person.
Oh, what's the fun fact?
So the
you
fun
have
fact,
it?
yes,
Oh, wow.
I do. I have it right here.
Look at you.
Teddy Roosevelt Island, as it's also known. In 1898, the island was actually used as a test site for dynamite by some local chemists. And it was secret, so, he didn't tell anyone about it. So D.C. police during that time got all these reports of oh my gosh, there are spies on this island and stuff. But the whole time it was just this professor doing some tests. They've, cleaned the area of any, hazardous material since then. But I thought that was kind of a fun fact.
That's so good.
Anyway,
okay.
That's it.
Okay, this is mine. In Georgetown, there's a little market called Smealy's, I think it's called, Smeeles. And it's like a cheese shop.
Ooh.
And so you meet there. You bring a basket or something and get pick out your cheese, pick out your crackers, something small.
Uh-huh.
Walk down to the canal and do a little, okay, what's our fun fact about the canal? Because you know everything about the canal.
Oh, well, there's, the little boat that goes up and down it now. That's fantastic.
Well, that's its own separate date. I was thinking go down to the waterfront and watch the boats go by.
Yeah.
You have the Kennedy Center view, have a little picnic.
Right.
I don't
little
know.
charcuterie board action going.
Yeah,
maybe?
if you see any celebrities down there, that's where you're going to see them. Is
true.
down at the in front of that fancy Italian restaurant. So there you go.
There you go. That's a pretty successful installment. DMV Download Dates. There you go.
Sorry, mine was rushed. I'll be more prepared next time. And that'll do it for us today on the DMV Download, sponsored by Steamfitters Local 602. Our managing editor is Craig Schwab, and our music is by Real World.
Give us a review and rate our show if you get the chance, and follow us on social media where we post content every day, literally. And then also on social media, you can find a link to a survey we have out for you to let us know how we're doing.
The DMV Download is a product of WTOP News. Listen on 103.5 FM in the D.C. area, 107.7 FM in Virginia, 103.9 FM in Frederick, Maryland, online at WTOP.com, and on the WTOP News app. Have a good night.